Welcome, everybody, and thanks for joining another session of Working Out Loud. Again, with this podcast, webinar, whatever we call it, this is a live stream. We're here to learn about B2B, B2C, SaaS, software as a service. And we're talking with people and with people who also represent products and the space and the market that we're in. What we want to do is really go to the next step. Remember Marc Andreessen, software eating the world? Well, it's eating the world and it's got low indigestion. We want to understand how software is changing our world and be a part of that conversation. And above all, what I like to do, and I'm really thankful to have Sarah Brown on the show with me today, my old friend, not old friend, but feels like we've known each other forever. We're here to connect with professionals who are building and using software and coming up with strategies each and every day so we can do our jobs better. So remember, if you're not learning, you are churning. We have to move fast. And this is a pre-recorded episode, so I still want to ask all of you to please be in the chat, ask questions. We will probably be there, and the spirit of LinkedIn and YouTube is we'll respond at any time. So ask questions. Let's have fun. Okay. Sarah, are you with me? I'm going to ask you to introduce yourself in just a second and hold on, but say hello to the audience.
Hi, everyone. And Dave, thank you so much for having me. I'm thrilled to be here.
I am. This is great. This is a reunion. All right, Sarah, we're going to get into a conversation here. And this is going to be somewhat different than a lot of the episodes that I've done in the past, because this is personal and it's also professional. And this is an opportunity for you and I to talk about our career journeys. Mm-hmm. Right. And I want to frame this up in a little bit different context. Fourth wall. Hey, audience, we're speaking to you right now. If you are like me, Sarah, others, and you've gravitated into this software, this startup world, particularly in software, what does that even mean? I'm a startup person. Sarah, would you call yourself well, yes, you're a startup person. Come on.
I've had the arsenic-laced Kool-Aid, yes.
I'm just going to put it into my words, and I'm going to come back to you and ask you to frame this up again in your language. Being a startup person, I have always been in my life this voracious reader, this unstoppable learner. And Sarah, when I get, it's a restless soul thing. When I get somewhere and I master a job, then I go, what's next? I've learned this. I'm moving on. And people look at me sometimes, they're like, what's wrong with Dave? He's got a great job. This is wonderful. He's got this mastered. I got to keep going, right? So in that vein, I am this startup person. I'm perfect for the startup industry because I learn fast. I want to master something. I want to teach other people. And then I want to go into the next thing and learn that and do the same thing. That's why I'm here. So for a lot of us, this can be perceived as a job hopping thing. And the world looks at those of us startup people a little bit differently. Like, well, why do they do this? And what's the joy behind it? Well, there's a lot of joys. One is I want to learn fast and I want to grow my career. And frankly, and here's where I'd like to start our conversation. I also want to break into that executive world at some point. I've had a good 20 plus years in my career. I know a lot of things. I've seen a lot of things. And now I want to share that with the world. And I want to help direct companies to do great things, to build awesome software, no matter how. So how can I prepare myself? I'm right there, right? What's this language? It's mysterious to me. What does a board of directors do? What do CEOs do all day? It sounds like one of those Dr. Seuss, what do people do all day books, So Sarah, I'm going to shut up now. We're going to intro your book here, Lead Upwards. This is an amazing book. Thank you for sending me a copy. I hailed it. Welcome. Introduce yourself, please. I'm sorry I talked so much, but I had to set you up.
Well, thank you, Dave. Thank you for sharing that. And that background, I think, is helpful for listeners who are feeling similarly and may have resonance with your background and story. And thank you for inhaling the book. That means the world to me. I think what you're getting at is no two startup career trajectories are alike. People are motivated by different things. This is something I like to talk about in the framework of attunement, right? Thinking about how we can attune ourselves in terms of other people on our teams. How can we understand people as individuals, but also how can we get to know ourselves and our career goals and align our career journeys with what's truly meaningful to us. And one thing I'll note, and we talk about this in the book, is if you want to be on the leadership team, there's not, startup leaders are not 10 feet tall. They're not a different sort of.
Really?
I've yet to meet one. And the point is that startup leadership is something that can be taught. And there are certain skills that you absolutely won't know how to do until you've done them before. And so something that I felt was important, especially as someone from underrepresented background, getting into startup leadership, but really for any of us, is understanding and demystifying this thing, which is the startup leadership level, and also understanding that leadership can happen regardless of your title. So if you're motivated by learning or motivated by certain things, you don't necessarily have to be an executive, or you don't have to sort of be in some particular role or title in order to have a really fulfilling startup career. So I'd say it's a both and. Yes, if you want to be a startup exec, here's the best playbook I could find based on interviewing almost 50 people whom I deeply admire, CEOs, VCs, startup leaders, about what their advice was. But also you can have an awesome career as a joiner without necessarily being at a specific title.
I like that. That's so refreshing, Sarah. I mean, I think to go back, what I was trying to say as we led into this episode is, here I am. I've been in this field for a long time. And I think the place I really want to start again is, I've looked at this glass ceiling or something, there's this mysterious world of people that are making decisions, and these decisions affect me. And now let's talk about today. We're right at the end of 2022. And what's happening is we're seeing a massive shift in the economy that's deeply impacting tech, right? Now things are happening and leaders are having to come out and make apology speeches or stand up for what they think. And gosh, I'm looking at that and I go, wow, I don't know how to feel about this. And I think you put the word joiner out there. Is that how we're calling ourselves as startup folks? We join in.
So I wish you were in the room when we were talking with the publisher, Wiley, fantastic publisher, about what to sort of call the book, who to name as our audience. And we ended up landing on, or I landed on, startup joiners, which is a term that was coined by Jeff Busgang, who's an awesome VC. He's featured in the book, got a chance to interview him. And I love this idea of the joiner, of someone who doesn't necessarily found a company. They're not necessarily the person who's started the thing, but joins it. And for every person who founds a company or is, CEO of a company, there's of course so many more of us who join. And yeah. I'm always a fan of the quote unquote little guy, and sort of the, we're not the little guy. There's actually quite a lot of us, but we have, to your point, many things that happen within companies that are outside of our purview and control, and many things that are within our control. So I think figuring out where we can find empowerment, agency, and build careers, given that there's very few startup career paths outlined at least early stage companies, it gets a little more, I'd say, defined as companies mature. And we talk about in the book, figuring out, Dave, this is something I'd love to dig in with you about, which is figuring out your ideal startup stage and type. So in your background, you have the gorgeous Service Rocket, like dear to my heart. Fun fact, I used to work at Service Rocket, was one of the most exciting journeys of my career, and the company is thriving right now. So it's a good place to be, and a lot of love for the team. But I will say, one of the things I loved about Service Rocket, I talk about this in the book, is the values, right? The startup values really matter. And to me, I'll just speak personally, and I'd be curious to get your feedback.
Yeah.
I am motivated by companies where I'm aligned with the mission. I'm a B2B SaaS person. I love it. And I'm really motivated by the ongoing customer success journey of a company after they become a closed won customer. So I'm a marketer, a VP of marketing at a company called Sastrify, and we can talk about that another time. But what I love is the idea of delivering value across the customer lifecycle. So marketing caring about that ongoing value delivery. And I know you care about that. You are a customer education leader and customer success leader, and focus on helping other companies do that now at Service Rocket, which is so cool. But I think that mission is what motivates me the most, caring about the company, caring about the customers that are served by the company, and also really just loving solving this problem. So those things get me up in the morning, and that translates to a lot of different startup types: self-funded, fundraised I've worked for companies that have fundraised tens of millions of dollars, right? It's not so much about that for me, but more about where are we headed? How are we helping our customers grow? And is the mission something I personally feel excited about? So handing it back to you, I mean, what has motivated you throughout your career? It sounds like learning. Are there other pieces that kind of stood out to you?
Yeah. Okay. You're doing a really, really good job. I don't even have to tee you up to talk about your inspiration and your mission, because that is it. I want to take a sidebar real quick, because
Sure.
reading this book and thinking about my journey and thinking about your journey and thinking about where we're going, and we became friends instantly, and I remember being at conferences where I saw you and you're like, hey, Dave, hey, Sarah, we're those kind of people. And there's so many of us. If you're listening, you're probably one of us. We just gravitate to a problem. We want to solve that problem. And this space is so weird. And I feel like I have been called, right? This sounds religious. It's not, but kind of. It's every one of us at some point in our career has this hard swallow moment where we go, what in the heck are you actually doing? And I'm sitting here throughout my career getting really amazing opportunities. Gainsight, Service Rocket, Outreach, whatever, unicorn stuff, crazy growth. Yet that navigation, where do I want to be, is almost like leading and pulling you, but you've got to work with it. And I've been thinking, should I get an MBA? Do I need an MBA to do this job? Do I want to be a leader or an executive because I have the vision? It's there. I see it. I know where to go. I want to get people around me to come with that. So what I really love about your book is that, as you said, there's things you can do now. You don't have to be a leader to be a leader. There's a trajectory that you can take. Are you kind of telling me that, no, I don't necessarily have to go get that MBA or be in the business school, that I might have the chops right now to be able to do this thing called leadership?
I love that question. And something I mentioned in the book is it really depends. And that's a bummer answer, but here's why I say that. Because there are startup CEOs who are 24 and they build unicorns with no management experience prior. And we've also seen startup CEOs that are in their, later stage in life, and this is kind of their last hurrah before sort of ending their career, and they build something really successful. It doesn't necessarily translate that the number of years of experience you have or a certain degree translates into effective startup leader. We've all worked for startup leaders with that padded resume where they weren't necessarily able to do this thing that we call in the book zoomability, which is the ability to zoom in and out at different levels. To give an example, being on the quote unquote shop floor, right? Working with your team, solving a problem, fixing that learning management system issue, right? Being able to get right in there and solve things. That's a startup thing. But you also have to zoom out, be able to talk at this really high level of, how does your work or your business function relate to the health of the business? And also, how does it relate to the market? And being able to talk to the board about how you're impacting company financials, right? Net revenue retention. These are all things in the customer success world or customer education world that you're impacting. How does that relate to the health and growth of the business? And I think that example of zoomability is really important because we've seen people who have very little experience and they're growing their startup career and they struggle to talk at that high altitude. And then again, we see those people who come from larger companies and maybe have a ton of experience in certain areas, but they can't get on the shop floor anymore. They haven't touched a CRM in years, or if they have, they're not. And it's not to say that neither, like both face challenges. And we interviewed folks saying, how did you make that gap or sort of bridge that gap between experience? But I think to your point of, do I get an MBA? Do I do this? I'd say it depends. What are your goals? And also being able to challenge this idea of being qualified, being anointed, right? I really believe this. And I talk about in the book, having interviewed dozens of leaders about this, you really can't be qualified to be a startup executive until you are one. There are just things you won't have experience doing until you've done them. So it's the chicken and the egg, or sort of it's impossible, right? So finding that first role and saying, do I even like this thing? Can I try? And I would say, Dave, for you, I mean, your leadership, I see you as a leader. I know so many people who are listening see you as that leader. And so it's really up to you. What do you want to feel that your gifts are being shared in the world in the way that you feel they should be?
Oh boy. Well, which gifts? No, God, oh my God, Sarah, this speaks to all of us. I'm really thankful you've written this book. I mean, I want to take you, can I take you on a journey with some questions?
Let's go.
Because what I really want to help the world understand is that this work here, I'm having a hard time these days reading, not because I'm like my eyes or anything, it's just time. And this is not pandering to an ego or anything. I got on a plane with this book. I love working on planes. Oh my God. I love working on planes because here I am in this little cocoon of my personal space. Don't touch me. I'm like right here in the thing. And I say, the world is shut off. No internet. Oh my God, I can get something done. I inhaled your book. Just slurped it all down on the plane to Nashville from Seattle. And what it just spoke to me. And there's so many questions that come out of this and themes that we've been threading through discussions. And where I want to pivot this discussion a little bit and pin it down is that I work with a lot of people now, and especially at Service Rocket. The thing I love about Service Rocket is that not only internally is this a massive amount of incredible diversity of an international company that's got a startup vibe, and Rob Castaneda and the team, Peter and Adam and everybody here do a wonderful job like bringing this culture. And we're all like this. We're like kind of entrepreneurial. And if somebody gets an idea, you get to work with it. But now I'm also talking with people out there like you in the audience who are growing their careers. And here's a place to start. The head of concept. Adored this. This solves a problem. Can you tell me a little bit more about, in your words, this chapter in the book? You're talking about a titling and growing into a role. And I love what you said here, because this is something I think everybody should pattern off of. I'll explain why, but I want to hear in your terms first, what was significant about this cognitive shift in thinking about titles?
Sure. So what we're trying to solve for in this part of the book is, how do you get your first startup leadership role if you haven't had it before, right? If you haven't been a VP of sales, being made a VP of sales, there's a gap that you have to figure out how to cross. A lot of people in the past promoted people based on potential. And often potential was shorthand for, this guy looks like me or reminds me of the guy who had the job before. Not always, but that often happens. And I would say in my case, I was promoted based on potential. So we do see examples where it's not necessarily pattern matching to that, but we have a challenge in the industry where there's all these folks who are really qualified to get to that next level, but don't necessarily have it on their resume yet. And the key word is yet. So how do we get there? There's a few different ways to go about it. I share some of it. Sometimes it's really hard to make the leap within your own company. And we can talk about that. There's parts in the book giving advice for if at your current company, there isn't that mobility. But sometimes at your current company, there is mobility through this thing being titled head of. What this is solving for is a lot of VCs or companies, even if they don't have necessarily funding from VCs, but maybe their perspective on leadership is, we can put someone at a head of title. It doesn't cost us anything, and we can always promote over them, right? We can always get a VP of sales when we raise our seed round or our Series A. But if you are the head of and you run the program, potentially you're more junior, or you have, sort of almost at that cusp level experience, you can then do the role and earn it. And this is what happened to me with my first executive role, where I did benefit from an executive coach and a CEO who believed in me and thought that I could do it. So I got that sort of, hey, I think you have potential. I was hired in as a head of marketing. I worked really hard to understand the parts of the function that I didn't yet know how to work with. Worked with my executive coach on how to speak to the board, how to solve for the things that VPs of marketing need to solve for. And when I asked for a promotion, my CEO said, "Oh, I thought you were already our VP of marketing," right? Like that, I had earned it and I'd over-delivered. Okay, that was a 5-minute conversation. It was the easiest promotion I've ever had.
Yes, I got a promotion.
But the key is, and this is, and I'm, I'm not a rocket scientist. I think the folks who are listening to this, if you have a vision of getting into leadership, your company may or may not have that level available. If there's already folks in those roles, you might need to switch companies if that's really important to you. So I don't want to mislead folks and say anyone can do this, but if at your current company, it's a small startup, it's growing, and there is that vacancy of, you can say, hey, I'm going to put my hand up, and you can be explicit about this with your manager who may or may not be a co-founder, CEO, and say, I'd like to own whatever this function is. I'd like to own product, make me the head of product, and I'd like to earn it. And you may or may not hire over me, and we can talk about what's best for the business. And if that makes sense, I'll commit and be on board, or potentially not if that's not what you want. But being able to say, but I'd like a shot. And I think what's great about that too is, regardless of title or whether or not you stay in that role, it gives you a chance to do the work of the role, which you won't get otherwise. For instance, if you don't ever get asked to create a marketing budget and show the ROI by all the different programs and where you would cut or where you would add things if suddenly you had to generate more leads, right? These are things that a CMO or VP of marketing needs to do. If you haven't been asked to do it, you won't do it, right? So even getting a chance to build on the job, that experience will then prepare you. And so if, for instance, you are made the head of sales, right? And you're in the role as if you were a VP, and then you go for a VP role somewhere else, you can be able to say, these are the skills that I had to learn, and I'm ready, right? So I think it's a great thing if you're willing to take it on. The downside to that is there's going to be a period of time where you're doing the next level of the role and maybe not being recognized for it yet. And so something to think about in terms of the workload.
That's brilliant. I'm going to share my screen for something here. I want to put this conversation piece up. You know this, right? Crossing the Chasm, Jeffrey Moore.
There you go.
I talk about this a lot, and it's funny because I'm in a conversation with folks, and this is part of a strategy workshop that I do, and I always bring this up. And there's some threads I wanted to pull through from what you're saying that I think actually are even more supportive of your mission, which is, one, look at this curve. You know what this curve is? This actually is an experience of an organization, of their life cycle, of their growth as and this could be a product within an existing company that's been around for 100 years, right? It can be, I create a new product in the company and I built the business unit and I push the product out, and this is marketing, really. It's the motions we go through. In startup land, though, this is a life. Everything is about this curve. And actually, you could actually have this curve on a couple of different dimensions. And why I talk about this with the head of concept is, I might enter here at the innovators level. This is a Series A company or a seed round company. And I think these concepts are really important. What we're talking about is, I look at the startup industry as an incubator for business and knowledge and growth, where you, Sarah, or me, Dave, I started off my career at a massive company. It was a pharmaceutical healthcare company. I was a cog in a machine. It was very linear. None of this was here. And my growth, I was bored out of my mind. I excelled out of a role because it's just who I am. And I moved and moved and moved and moved to the point where I got out of that and went into software where it could keep up with me. But the point is, these are felt experiences of, I love this chapter. What I'm doing is saying, let's as an industry encourage more use of this term, head up, and for longer times. And there's reasons for it. Number one, if you hire somebody today at an innovator level, early in the company, Series A, and you give them a VP of customer education title, you are doing everybody a massive disservice by that, because you don't allow for that person to grow. And they're going to make mistakes, and they may not be at that level yet. And we want to nurture that growth over time. So I love that it actually helps combat title inflation, which is a big problem in startups, where you see people, like I had this happen to me several times. I'm in a role, I'm a manager, I'm a senior manager. Leadership says, oh, we're going to bring a director of customer education in. Wait a minute. And that's that moment where I go, Sarah, I've been here for a while and I've done that job, and here's the evidence of that. And you want to bring somebody in? Well, let's have that means Dave, I should be asserting myself more and building myself up to that role. But I was kind of locked in. What are your thoughts about that? Is that,
It's interesting. When startups grow and mature, ideally they will have teams, HR people teams that will create career pathing and leveling that makes sense. We've all worked at startups where we know that there's just weird leveling stuff, and it's not on purpose and there's no malintent. I really believe that. It's just, it's not mapped to any sort of framework. And so certain people will get titles. And I have to say, to your point of it being a disservice to someone who's given a title early on that maybe they haven't quite earned yet, is I think then if someone is brought in over them, it creates that friction of, hey, wait a minute, if you hire this person over me, that means I have to potentially go, right? If you're a VP of product and suddenly it looks like, we need someone who can really take the product to the next level to match the expectations of the market. Your experience has gotten us very far, but we need someone who can take us to the next stage. Very common. And this is in every function.
Yeah.
Then that person would have to be demoted. And there's a natural human challenge there. So again, it's not perfect, but I do like the idea, especially early on, to be able to give. And I think giving out a certain title, you think about why you're giving out this title, because it needs to reflect reality, but also, to your point, create a growth opportunity for everyone, right? And I think some folks are not going to want to be necessarily that VP of product. They might say, I'd like to be the head of product for early stage, and then make me a senior manager of a different part, this specific part of the product, and then hire someone who wants to own the entire vision. So I think that we also need to take a step back and say, why are we doing this? It's because we want to put everyone in the right role and also give people a chance to grow into the next stage, whatever that is.
I love that. And I particularly wanted to talk about this because I've worked with a lot of people that are earlier in their careers who think a lot about, I've got to get the title. I have been trapped in that. And I've been around for a long time. There's this race. And I wanted to bring that up because I've seen people get locked into a title, and then maybe they get a title that's too high, and then they can't get jobs easily because now somebody says, oh, well, you've been a VP, but you're applying for a manager role. What gives? And what I was at a startup. So that, okay. I don't want to go too much further into that, but I think that's really important to bring out.
Sure. And in our industry, to go back to your original point, we're going through a weird time. There's layoffs. Companies are under so much pressure to be efficient. I'd say being an executive at a startup is not some sort of a gravy train right now. I mean, maybe for some folks, but I'm saying this to say it is a difficult time to be anyone at a startup. Yeah. And it's still multi-trillion-dollar business. Like, there's a lot that needs to get done, and there's so much good work. And I like the idea of focusing on, what is the work I want to do? What do I need to be recognized for it? And within that, being a leader, to me, gives me the highest opportunity to do the work I want to do, and particularly in marketing, and shape organizations the way I wish they were shaped. And something I talk about in the book, and I'd love to spend a little bit of time on, is who have been the best leaders we've worked with and worked for. And I dedicated this book to two former Service Rocket employees, Aaron Rand and Colleen Blake. I'll give them big shout outs.
Hey, Aaron and Colleen.
Wonderful leaders who have done remarkable things in their careers and have really shaped my life and career as friends and as mentors and leaders. And also to Matt Harada, another former boss of mine. He was a CEO of a company I worked with. And also to my late grandmother. Shout out to Zelda Littman. We miss her, and she was always such a supporter of my career. But my point is, I dedicated this book to three of my favorite bosses, because maybe someone out there will be inspired to be a boss that is worth dedicating a book to. And I talk about this because we've all had also experiences with leaders who did not cut the mustard, who were ineffective, who were not necessarily the kind of leaders we would aspire to be. And something that I think about a lot is leadership is something we all have to work at ongoing. And being a leader is a responsibility where you can, this is something I've heard Rob Castaneda, CEO of Service Rocket, talk about. You really impact someone's life when you're their manager. I mean, if you think about how someone's day goes and then they go home to their spouse or to their family, an interaction at work that can be challenging or potentially, we'll use the word toxic, sure, can really impact someone's quality of life. I mean, that is huge. And And we can't rest on our laurels and say, oh, well, I've figured out leadership. Gosh, no, it's so humbling every day, especially, with the challenges we've all been going through in the world. Being a leader requires a high degree of empathy, compassion, attention, thoughtfulness, filling your own cup. And without doing those things, we know that it really impacts other people. So to me, that's the other side to this. If you're interested in growing your leadership, really thinking about why and how you want to impact those around you, knowing, I love this idea of servant leadership, right? You're there to support your team to produce, and that there is a lot of humility in that. And you can really impact someone's life negatively, hopefully not, but that is a reality we have to confront.
Well, isn't it? It's something I put in our working script as we were talking through things. What you're talking about to me is this concept of letting go and transforming, because I think I'm going to be totally transparent with our audience and with you, just as a person to person. I look at leadership as a path forward to financial security, right? I'm going to go back in time to one of my first jobs ever. I was working in a manufacturing plant. And I remember sitting in the audience at an HR training thing, and they showed up on the board this career progression chart. And it was independent contributor, you're like a light manager, or you're able to follow orders basically, and then you're able to independently do things that you don't have to be told to do. But the contributing through others was something that stuck in my mind and resonated. And that involved this letting go, which I struggle with. I struggle with letting go of, like you were talking about, as a startup person. I zoom in, zoom out. Today, what are we doing? Oh my gosh, we got a billing problem. We need to sit down and go through all of our stuff and understand exactly what the customer needs and make sure that solve that problem right now. Well, that didn't have anything to do with my field or industry at all. That's numbers, right? Sometimes something's so critical, but I have to trust in my team that they know better than I do. And I have to zoom out and say, now I have to make sure they're all working really hard. I need to take care of these folks. Bring in dinner. Hey, we're going to work really late. Or I don't want you to work late, so I'm going to hire contractors to come in and help us out. So it's almost like mom or dad in a sense, where we say, hey, we're going on vacation to Wally World. I don't know why I'm thinking of vacation, Christmas vacation or whatever, but we're there to chart the course to the destination. We're there to make sure the team's going along with us. It's a hard role. It's very different, but it also brings your full self in.
To the point of, I won't speak to Wally World, but to the point of the decisions you make, you set the tone and the culture as a team. I worked for a leader once who worked through having serious pneumonia and made it very clear that was what he expected of the team. I didn't enjoy that team. I didn't last very long, and I moved to a different team. I've worked for a leader who loved to work at 2 a.m. This is a different side of things. She had a family, and she said, look, I'm going to work at 2 a.m. sometimes because that's what's best for me, but I have zero expectations that anyone else join me burning the 2 a.m. oil, so to speak. And because she made that clear, because she set those expectations and made it very, very clear that we could all have our own boundaries, and these were her boundaries, I felt safe not working at 2 a.m. Good. There were a couple of times I did work at 2 a.m. unrelated to her sort of loving that hour. But I share this to say we're living in a very different time now than even the tech industry a few years ago, with hybrid and remote work. At Sastrify, which is where I lead marketing, we are in more than 23 countries. We are in multiple time zones. Being on the West Coast and working with the team in Europe, we somehow managed to be a high-performing team because we work really well asynchronously. We've got a lot of different practices here. And so my leadership style has to be in some ways outside of the micromanagement category, because I simply can't. I'm not awake to do that. And I've hired people who are extraordinary at what they do, or are becoming extraordinary at what they do, because that is required in that role. Other jobs and other roles, it's really hard. And I want to be honest about that. If you're an entry-level SDR and you don't know what it's like to be, there's now tech solutions that are starting to solve for this. But if you've never worked in an office before and don't have that frame of reference, it's challenging. And so I would also say, regardless of what title you are, where you are in your journey, figuring out what you need, whether that's I need a manager who's going to show me how to be a professional and work, or I need a manager who's going to guide me in that way, or I really need hands off and I want to work in a department, or I want to work for a company where I'm given a lot of autonomy, whether I'm an IC or a manager. Those are decisions we all have to make. And I think it's interesting. It's challenging when we think about all the criteria that we have to consider when joining a company. Plus, I really push people to look at, to the degree possible, the financial health of the company and asking difficult questions in the interview, like, hey, am I going to have a job in 2 months? Is this going to be a business unit that's invested in? Or what are the fundraising goals of the company? Is the company planning to IPO? Am I going to have to get on that rocket ship for better or for worse, which may or may not burn me out? And I think those are questions that often we are taught not to ask because it seems less enthusiastic, or we have a fear that it might somehow slow things down to ask those questions in the midst of a lot of excitement. I would say to the degree you are able to get information, particularly from founders, when you're in the interview process for any startup role, find out what's the financial health of the business. Were there layoffs like a month ago before I joined? I mean, these are things you can find out now online. And I really think there's a mutual agreement. Actually, I love that you brought up Jeffrey Moore. We did a podcast with him at Service Rocket. Maybe we can link to that in the show notes.
I heard about that. I'd like to meet him again and have him back on the show.
There you go. I remember with Bill Cushard, who used to co-host a Service Rocket podcast. We did that together in the old days. What I loved was Jeffrey Moore saying, software as a service, it's not a prison sentence. You don't have to sort of get locked into this contract with customers. And he said it far better, more eloquently than I'm paraphrasing it. But it's the same way with tech, right? Companies are not families. They can at will at least in the US, labor laws are different in other countries, but we have an employment contract that is shifting. And I think we need to be honest about that. And so as employees, figuring out what is it that we need, knowing that there's a lot of volatility. I talk about consulting in the book. This is something I think is wildly empowering. I've been a consultant, and I think having the and I know you've done some of that work, having the option to, and again, this is a privilege not everyone has, and there's a lot of pieces to it. But I would say if you have the ability to, with your employer's permission, do some consulting and have that background, being able to create multiple stability sources within yourself that are not dependent on one company. And I think also as bought into as you are to the startup mission, right? As much as you love it, it's a job. It's just a job. So both, and we can love it. We can drink the arsenic Kool-Aid. And at the end of the day, we have to take care of ourselves.
Okay. I want to work on this. I want to pivot. I want to not pivot necessarily, but I want to elevate what you're talking about there, because you're talking about your brand. You're talking about your career trajectory and working through maybe multiple companies. This is hard. This is I feel a lot of pressure. I have felt a lot of pressure in my lifetime from other people saying, why are you changing jobs every time? What's wrong with the company that you were at? Wasn't it good? You like, okay, well, wait, we're in a different world. And when you think about, what I'm trying to lead up to, Sarah, is let's talk pre first 90 days. About us as people. I have my own thing, right? I'm my own brand now. I never thought I would do this, but all of a sudden I have lots of LinkedIn connections. I have a mission. I have content. When people look at Dave, they go, oh, he's a customer education guy, C-Lab. Okay, cool. That is powerful, because now that can go to my company that I'm going to work with. Not everybody's going to have this, but you do have a body of work. You are an individual. You are powerful in your own right, and you're really important to the companies that are looking for you. And what I'm seeing, though, is weird. Some companies get that. They go, Sarah, I see you're a brand. Your brand matters to me because you have a voice outside of us, but we're going to partner now. You're part of our brand. And then you might detach later. But as you're going in to look for that next fit in your journey, that's where things get a little hard. I'm seeing things like, okay, in your book, I was reading a really cool portion of all the things that you should do your first 90-day plan. You know what? I wanted to ask you this question.
Sure.
Do you see in that interview process for more executive leadership roles that is, okay, I've got to say this before I ask you the question. I have seen people, even in manager roles, get asked to build these 90-day plans for free in an interview with a lot of other people. And I would expect this of an executive role, but not maybe just a head of, maybe a series A, where if I do my due diligence and I see, okay, this company is, they're doing okay. I'm going to come in and do a lot of work. I'm going to have to prove myself. Great. Can you speak to that? Like, what is this?
Oh gosh, we're talking about startup hiring now.
And then,
Okay. Okay.
yeah, well, you opened up the door. We got to talk about it a little bit.
Dave, I have to say, I did include in the book, I say, if your company totally botches your interview process, it's possible the company isn't terrible. They just haven't built out the HR and people function.
That
So
is fair.
potentially cut them some slack. If everything else is on fire, note that. But that is a particular thing I will just say sometimes is egregiously broken, and making candidates that should not be delivering strategic plans. Yes, I'm sorry that has happened to many of us. And I've probably been a bearer of some sort of an assignment that was unfair and, mea culpa. I think there's a lot of learning there in figuring out how do we respect that people have lives, and applying for our job is not their full-time role. And we need to respect that and not, so that aside, I will say figuring out what management or VP or head of or CMO or whatever the title is means at your company is what you're after. And if a senior manager is truly expected to perform at what we might call that strategic level, it should be recognized. And maybe there is some, again, when we look at sort of larger companies, right, they have that clear pathing and leveling, and that's explicit. So I would just say if anyone is listening to this and they're going out for a role and there's expectations that within the role seem outside of it, that can be a really good way to get a promotion, saying, hey, you're asking me to do all of these things and I'm doing it really well. That's actually really a director level. And I can prove it by talking about these other director level job descriptions I've found, or talking to, other HR folks who've kind of pointed out this is the leveling. And again, no bad intent. Maybe the company just hadn't thought about it. But sometimes we do see certain parts of organizations, a senior manager is expected. I actually think senior managers are the secret sort of. I think all companies are run by senior managers. This is my real opinion. Because when I think back to when I was a senior manager, I was like, I was effective then. That was what is the promoted into incompetence? What is that sort of? We'll let some reader point out here, listener. But I will say, I think if you're in a position, let's say you're already at a company and you're doing things outside of your role, that's absolutely worth a conversation with your leader. And I recently had someone on my team who was performing wildly outside of his role. We got him a really quick promotion, and he had just been promoted. And it was, you know what? You're doing the work of the next level up. And that's a really cool thing about a startup. So the positive side to it is sometimes you can move really quickly up the ranks, and it's well-deserved in those cases. And so not having to wait and sort of put in a certain number of years or time at a company, that I would just say is a benefit to a lot of startup environments. You can advance quickly if you're doing the job.
Yeah, if you're doing a job, you're aware of it. The next, let's do this. One of the things that we haven't done quite yet in this interview, and I think you do a lot of good work in the book, is really unveiling the mystery that is leadership. And it's not like, okay, I know what a VP should do, kind of theoretically, but not really. And this is at a point in my life where I'm back and forth at that. I call it the line. Are you in this context? It's above the line is, in my context, a leadership role that's facing executive status. Maybe you're not at that, but you have influence. Below the line is typically those senior manager and below, where I've spent a lot of my career at, where you're doing a lot of the work and you're doing a lot of leadership, but you don't have influence like you could if you were director, VP, etc. So something I'm curious about from your experience is there's executives and their day-to-day, and then there's the board, and we as joiners hear all this stuff, and there's all this fluid, like, oh, the board this, the board that, oh, we're going to talk about this, hey, like EBITDA, Okay. Can you talk about this a little bit? I want people to read the book, so I don't want you to get too deep in the weeds, but can you point to some of the things that you're talking about in your work that help unveil the mystery and
Sure.
connect us more to the mission of the company and let us, I want to be more effective, really, whether I am a leader or I'm not a leader. I want to be a leader.
I love that. Taking a step back.
Yeah.
Why do we want to understand what leadership means? I think because when we don't understand something, we can't ever be a part of it. And as a member of underrepresented group, or as someone who hasn't been in a certain role, regardless of our background, lack of knowledge is lack of empowerment. So I always want to understand what is it that I don't know, right? The Dunning-Kruger effect. And it's just hard to understand what a leader does unless you're that person. And something I write about in the book is I would see VPs and C-level folks at my company that their calendar was just blocked all day.
Yeah.
Tons and tons of meetings.
I don't get it.
They were busy. I didn't know what they were busy doing, but they were very busy. And that was impressive to me and terrifying. And I felt so, aware of that. Now, as someone who's in that seat, I have a lot more visibility and I understand. So I want to talk about it. What is it that people are doing all day? I actually wrote in the book, here is what a VP of startup marketing does all day, or here is what a VP of product does all day. This is what literally a day in the life is, because it's, hey, do you want that day in the life? Is that something you want to do? It is a bigger bag to carry, so to speak, in a lot of ways, but it's also it's knowable. We can't just sort of point at it and say, oh, it's a blocked calendar. Actually, it's one-on-ones with your direct reports. It's cross-functional meetings with your stakeholders. If you're a VP of marketing, you're going to be meeting with the VP or sort of CRO, VP of sales or CRO. You're going to be meeting with revenue operations to understand those pieces of the cross-functional alignment. You're going to have a pipeline council or a revenue team sync once a week. You're going to have your executive team meeting once a week. You're going to talk through strategic initiatives there. You're going to also have various meetings potentially with customers or facing the market. We can go on and on. I've outlined it in the book. But this is what the meetings are. And then thinking through at the contextual level, you're always going to have the most context of anyone on the team, sort of from a like a breadth standpoint. Although in terms of a specific area, your team leads or people who report to you are going to have the most knowledge of what's going on the ground floor. This is why the Zoom ability is so crucial, because we've all worked for leaders who kind of have no idea what's going on. And we know that that's a style of leadership. And to me, that seems pretty ineffective. And a lot of those leaders tend to be shown the door. Actually, the average tenure for a revenue leader, according to Pavilion, is under 2 years. It's pretty short.
Ouch.
Yeah, it's about 1.5 years. And the reason why is it's really hard to be in a revenue role and a revenue leadership role, particularly in today's economy. So there's no harm or foul in moving quickly through roles. It's not about that. It's more about, I think, the pressure that's on. So where's that pressure coming from? It's coming from meeting expectations at a lot of different levels. I think it's important to think through this idea of being anointed, and just something I would say, Dave, tomorrow, if you wanted to be, chief customer education officer at any company, you could go do it. The question is sort of what other pieces are serving you. And to folks who are listening, this is something that we talk about in the book. Sam McKenna, who's featured, she's a former VP at companies like LinkedIn. She now runs her own firm. Highly recommend checking out her work. But she talked about becoming a VP of sales, and she had people under her then who were saying, I want to be a VP of sales, Sam. How do I do that? And, she had someone come to her and say, I organized the team birthday party. I think I'm really ready for the next stage of leadership. And she was like, team birthday party is great, but you got to hit quota. And that's going to be something that is essential for getting to the next role. And if you're looking for a leadership role, making sure that you're still doing the job you currently have really, really well is important. You have to cover that. Yeah. If you're looking to be a director of sales and you can't hit your quota as an AE, that's a flag. And thinking also through what you want your day to look like. Do you want to be in meetings where you're constantly working cross-functionally. You have a lot of context that you then have to share with multiple teams and people. I feel like I'm constantly sharing context from my team. Someone asked, are global searches for our industry down? Like, how's the market doing? So we huddle with the demand gen team. We look at all the data. We see, actually, they're up, and this is why. And we've doubled traffic over the last 3 months. And actually, that's true. A huge shout out to our demand gen team.
Yeah.
But, answering those questions, no one else is going to go in the freaking HubSpot dashboard and look at it if it's not our team, right? The other teams are not necessarily, but they have those questions. And I'm sharing this as a flippant example, but at the board level, like, who are the board? Let's demystify that. These are investors. Yeah. These are people who have their investors to think about, their limited partners. They need to bring a return. And hopefully, if you're invested, your company will be that, that will return the fund and sort of make them superstars. So we are all trying to make someone a superstar, and I actually think the real superstars are the customers. But at the level that we're talking about here, everyone has a boss, and whether that boss is your customers because you're self-funded, or your boss is your customers plus your board, and then their board or their stakeholders, we all have someone to report to. And so I would say the last piece on humility and leadership is you don't get to some sort of top and then get to rest. It's actually, you have a much tougher boss now, particularly if it's a customer. So
I really like how you're approaching this. It never ends. There's always more mysteries. There's always more questions. There's always more things to learn. And the experiences that I've had today with leadership, the good experiences that I've had have been ones where people like you tell me, okay, hey, don't worry. You've got what you need. You can do okay. You're going to present to the board of directors. Oh my God, what? No, you're going to be fine, Dave. It's going to be going back to the zooming up and down. One of the things that I found that I did accidentally, and I never thought this was important. I'm a very transparent leader. That means, and it took someone else, one of my dear friends who was an employee of mine for a while, to tell me that they really liked this. And it was that I had shared what I learned that I could share about the health of the company, the growth of the company, and the things that leaders were thinking about.
Mm-hmm.
And I brought that down because I cared about that. And I said, okay, in this context, hey, we're going to go do this thing. Why are we going to do that? That's okay. Here's what leadership is thinking. While I think blah, 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 and you think blah, 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 here's what's going on that we don't know. Oh, and it's suddenly the light bulb comes on, and you're connecting leadership all the way down to the ground floor. And everybody goes, we got this. And that's what leadership means to me. It's this fluidity of caretaking and shepherding, like you said, what was it? Stewardship, where I feel more and more my mission is, look, I've got a passion. I've got a driving passion for what I do. How can I lock that into the organization that I'm in, get to know everybody at all levels of the organization, and my job is to partner with all of them to be successful. That's a dance.
A dance. Nice. I love that. I will say sometimes you can't share things and it's terrible. And one thing I will note, if you're interested in getting into leadership, if you're already in leadership, you understand this intimately. Mm-hmm. It's a bit lonely. You really can't be friends with your direct reports in the same way, simply because you have the power to potentially hire them or fire them or promote them. And that power imbalance is something that we need to talk more about. And I think we've seen too many leaders abuse power in different ways. And that's why I talk about, making sure you take care of yourself and don't expect your direct reports to work through your emotional challenges, right? Like we're human at work, and anything we're not resolving within our own world, we're going to potentially put that on others, and that's inappropriate. And I think there are times when I have context that I am simply not allowed to share, or I'm unable to share at a certain time. And also being willing to hold that responsibility. It's not necessarily something that's nefarious or lack of transparency. It's, I simply maybe can't. I don't have, legally I can't, or there's some piece of information I can't, based on commitments I've made to my stakeholders. And so being willing to sit with that, it's uncomfortable. And sometimes, it'd be great to pull the team aside and say, hey, this is really what's on my mind here. But, being able to convey, I think also a sense of building that trust with your team and understanding that, hey, I'm going to share as much as I can. And here's what I'm able to share. And if I could share more, I absolutely would. And when I can share more, I will. And here's the process for what that's going to look like. But being willing to sit with the fact that you're kind of in a different spot, the air is a different, what's the word I'm looking for? It's a different thickness. I'm thinking about Boulder right now and the altitude.
You know what came to mind for me? I'm thinking back to, I was watching The Tudors, of all things. And
haven't seen that show. It was a special.
The Tudors was a historical fiction show on History Channel featuring Henry Cavill, was really kind of got his start before Superman and all that kind of stuff. And remember his character talking about the Privy Council, the privileged council. You're privileged with information that is sensitive and PII and all that kind of stuff. And we bring that into to demystify what's happening. Leaders, and I've been one of these leaders that's been dealing with really hard challenges and things that you have to convey, and that might affect everything. But what I'm saying is, and why I really love this book, again, just going back to why this is important to anybody on all axes, is that we all are in a race. We're trying to secure our futures. We want to grow. We want to learn. We want that title. But there's so much going on involved in that. And that reading this kind of book and learning and talking to your leaders and asking them, or getting a coach, are all these plays that we can make to move along. Like where I'm at in my career, I actually have a question for you. And this one I want to make relevant. I'm asking for you to be a coach now. Okay. We'll lead out on this one. I think we're getting close to our time where we should wrap. But now I have a C-Lab question for you, or a customer education industry question.
Let's do it.
You ready?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. To be very specific, a lot of people that come to this in C-Lab and Working Out Loud are in a nascent field, a new field called customer education. This field, again, going back to some of the words you said, thinking about the customer, we put the customer before the word education because the customer is most important to educate and to become successful. That customer can be anybody, right? One of the most profound challenges that we have in this industry, and again, I'm going to say this again, be quiet. One of the most profound challenges we have in software as a service, B2B, B2C, is that, and someone articulated this really well the other day, the word education comes with a lot of semantic freight. And culturally, everybody educates. We all know how important it is. But from an executive point of view, is it really important? And you can kind of start saying that to yourself, like, well, we could get rid of these people because they're just not. No. I assert that education is one of the most important functions, strategic functions of a business in SaaS. Why? Because it encapsulates and delivers all of the learning motions and interventions that happen at all levels throughout your own company. And we miss it. So my challenge is this, and this is the question I have to you now, rephrased. What is it that we as an industry, as a market, can do as individual leaders, or people are pressing up into leadership roles now? Because now I'm seeing customer education VPs. We've never seen that before. That means our field and our discipline is being recognized by executive leaderships. What are some of the things, Sarah, that we can do to aspire to be that chief learning officer or chief education officer and bring and fill, the other thing, now I'm thinking about this because I'm looking at the graphics that you had in your, I can't remember which page it was, where you're showing how different fiefdoms within a company expand to fill gaps and to grow. And this is a huge gap in our market, learning. How would you say we can get a seat at the table?
Mm-hmm. So I love that you brought up this graphic. Is actually created by Matt Harada, the book is, if you create awesome graphics for my book, I'm going to dedicate the book to you. But in all seriousness, Matt's a brilliant CEO and leader. And we talked through this together, and I got his permission, of course, to include these. And what it is, a lot of us, if you think about the pie, right? And expanding the pie, a lot of us have these little bubbles that we're owning, but then sort of within, and it's hard without the visual in front of me, but with these little bubbles, it leaves spaces in between these gaps.
I'll
And
put
so,
the visual in there so you can talk
sure,
around it and knowing it'll be on the screen.
wonderful. But then thinking about how you can actually own in between the gaps. I think that's the key that we think about with leadership. I'm not a marketer who owns marketing leads. That's interesting to me and my team. I own pipeline. Can I bring in dollars that will be strong enough to close? And what I mean by that is, can I bring in truly qualified leads that will then become a customer? Can I measure that and quantify that also in retired pipeline? So pipeline that has actually closed and become a new customer. And then we can look at things like customer retention. That's a whole other topic. But if I'm just thinking about my world, and I say just, if you're in customer education, you're doing incredibly important work. And I am incredibly inspired by what you're doing, because everyone who uses SaaS needs customer education. And I am a user
Amen.
of SaaS, and I need to adopt many tools and could not do it. I'm very grateful to Dave, your great work that I've gotten to benefit from,
Thank you.
and others who are on the show. I mean, this is amazing, and unsung heroes in many cases. But how do you become a sung hero? I don't know if that's an expression, but how do you get
Yeah,
credit? Is caring about those gaps and thinking about, okay, we've got customer education here, but actually I'm driving net customer retention or net revenue retention. And this is something my board cares about. And being able to speak at that altitude of, look, we didn't just build 3 new courses. We were able to increase net revenue retention. I can prove it by these things. And based on those metrics that we've all agreed are important in driving the health of our business, I'm truly building this function, in this way that's contributing this value. I'm stumbling a bit here, but I think that's the framework and the mindset.
Okay, that was the answer I was hoping for. And in fact, I'm looking now at page 261.
Oh, wow. This is
And
okay.
I read the heck out of it. I'm going to read it a couple of times because there are gems in this book that help all of us. And what I liked most of all, now I do workshops, and if I were to show, okay, I got to do this. I always do this. I've got to pitch our program. Sorry, Sarah, give me just a moment here.
Thank you. I can't wait to hear more.
Let me make sure I have the right. Nope, that's not the right page. One more. Glad I'm not showing that because I'll show myself being silly. One of the things that I am fabulously excited about doing with our clients at Service Rocket is we have a program, Customer Education as a Service. Okay, think about that. So now I'm helping you kind of X-source, I don't want to call it outsourcing because that's not right. I want to partner with you and understand a lot of the motions that are happening. Now, when I get to, there's a product that I do, or there's a motion that I do. Let's say this is strategic engagement. If you look on our site, we offer a lot of different things, these packages. One of the packages that I love to work with is analytics and reporting, which is, and this is a call to action, I think, for education professionals that are working in this market. Page 261 of your book says, other types of slides to include in your board deck. Okay, Dave, you're saying board deck. Am I making a board deck? Yes. I tell my network, build a walking around deck. Be that leader. Have it in your back pocket. You could be a manager. You could just be an IC. And you're every day doing work. Can you prove what you've done? Do you show your goals? And this says you have a title slide, OKR slide. What are the metrics trending over time with percent change and explanations and call out boxes? Oh, wow. Narrative driven slide highlighting the programs and initiatives you built and how they're tied to results you achieved last period. Yeah. You know what? I could save my manager, my VP, my senior VP, and my executives so much time by just having that. A walking around deck. So that's something that I'm really evangelizing, Sarah, is that we all as education folks now, and no matter if you're listening to this, no matter whom you are, encapsulating and presenting and communicating and sharing above, below the line, everywhere, beside the line to your partners and peers sets you up, I think, as a leader. And that's what we need in my industry, in customer education. We all need that in software.
That's a beautiful note to end on, Dave. I'll say, if you want to be in startups, I'm rooting for you. You deserve to be here. I think there's room for everyone in some role. And don't let anyone else tell you when your journey is over or has stalled out. You are the only one who gets to decide that. And so if you want to keep going, if you want to be here, I'll be rooting for you, and I'm excited to learn from you on this journey.
Oh, fabulous. You're a pro here, Sarah. Let's close out on this. You have a website, right? And that is sarahbrownmarketing.com. Let's go there. www.sarahbrownmarketing.com. I'll show it on the screen. This is where you can find your book and other books you've written. What are you at, 2, 3 now?
I'm at 2. We can see my review of Startup Boards, another fantastic book by Brad Feld,
Ooh.
Matt Blumberg, and Mahendra.
Another Wiley book too. That's incredible. Wiley is doing great here.
You know, we're a small but I'd say growing contingent, and my first book, Power to the Start. Thank you, Dave. My first book, Power to the Startup People, is focused on joiners as well, and it's more for sort of early stage folks who are just getting into the startup world. Think about your friend who graduated from high school, or maybe yourself if you're trying to switch careers. And then the biggest piece of feedback I got from folks who read the book was, what about leadership? And then on my own leadership journey, really felt that there was a dearth of resources out there. I had benefited from an executive coach. Not everyone can afford one or has the opportunity to get one through their company. And I thought that was crazy. I thought we should be making this information more available. And so I sought it out. It was my pandemic project. I did not learn how to bake bread. I learned how to bake this book, and it was delicious. Hopefully other people find it to be nourishing as well.
We absolutely do. And that's amazing. So let's give you attribution. You're on LinkedIn. Where do you like people to reach out to you and connect with you?
LinkedIn's great. I tend to hang out there. It seems to be one of the more lively places, and anywhere Dave is, I'll go hang out there. If you tell me in the network, just ping me. I'll get over there as soon as possible. I follow you.
I follow you too. I'm always out there on LinkedIn. And okay. Whew. This has been great. This is another bucket list. I wanted to come back and reconnect with you, Sarah. I love the trajectory of your career.
Thank you.
These 2 books have been, I've got to go back and read the first one. I loved this one. I have your other book. I've got a library. We're going to have a book club going on and read some of these. Mm-hmm. Sarah, again, thank you so much for your time here.
Thank you.
To our audience, once again, this is, on a couple different notes. We're working to find the others. We're working to help you in your career. Go pick up Lead Upwards from Sarah. It's an amazing book. It will help you if you're where I am, which is I'm always looking up. Where I'm looking up and looking out, and even where you're at, it will help you in the present moment. So with that, thank you for joining. Leave your comments. Go visit Sarah. Download her book. Thanks for joining, everybody.
Thank you so much for having me, Dave. It's a pleasure.